Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our LinkedIn Live today. We'll be discussing deploying AI on a large scale, the challenges, the solutions, some of the real life examples as well in this topic. And just to introduce myself, so I'm Luke. I'm a managing consultant here at Harnham, specializing in AI, ML engineering, ML ops, and data science. And we're obviously Harnham leaders and global leaders in data AI talent solutions, where we support hires in the data and AI space from entry to executive level. And to chat with us today is we've got a special guest, Rob, an industry expert in the field of large-scale AI deployment and the founder of HSAT. So it's great to have you with us today, and excited to hear your insights and uncover, I guess, in the next hour or so, everything you have to say about the LLM and ChatGPT space. All as well in this session, feel free to write any questions on our chat, and we'll try and answer them as quickly as possible. But yeah, happy for you to introduce yourself.
Thanks. I'm going to clarify. I'm not that smart. There's my colleagues like Liv and Tom and Sam. They're far smarter than me. I'm just here to do the chat. So I do have a good understanding. I've been working in the data for 20 years. Deployed the first language model, not large language model, back in 2006. That's how old I am. And I've been working with data really mainly in financial services. But there are many people better than me, just to clarify that. But I'll help you talk about some of the things that we've been deploying at the very large scale. So.
Absolutely. Well, it's great. Obviously, we're going to go through a few topics here. Generative AI in everyday, so versus kind of the large scale approach of it and the deployment of it. So obviously ChatGPT, everyone today is trying to implement it. Obviously a lot of CEOs, a lot of boards are trying to implement in their organizations. But sometimes they're not always equipped to kind of embrace and start in this space. I guess, firstly, what are your thoughts on how that comes across really for organizations when trying to get into that space?
I mean, first of all, ChatGPT is obviously a complete game changer. It totally changes how we interact, and it's like the internet. It comes to the world and it's going to change how we work forever. There's no doubt about that. The challenges is that it's very, very low barrier of entry, and that means everyone's just using it and they're throwing data into it. And this opens up a world of chaos from regulations, security. You could easily put in a whole bunch of HR data in there, and then people say, hey, it's helping me understand, people's performance, and suddenly you're exposing people's data you wouldn't do. So there's a big challenge there with people being overly keen to use it, but not perhaps realize some repercussions.
Yeah. Of course, as well, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But yeah, no, absolutely, that security side of things is something that we see here at Harnham as well as a challenge when people are trying to approach this space. Another issue, and more on the recruitment side perhaps, is skill set. Sometimes people are missing the mark on trying to implement these solutions in their businesses, and sometimes, finding out what you actually need in the organization is quite tricky. I know how have you dealt with that? What would your suggestions be?
Carefully, that's a good way of doing it. I mean, you want to move quickly, but you want to move carefully. So if you want to roll out anything, it's never just one person you need. So if you were back in the day, you wanted to roll out, say, some SQL analytics, you would have to get a SQL guy, that's obvious, but then you need to get an infrastructure person and a networking person, a storage person, a backup person, and then you maybe get a DBA. You have a whole team around that. And people know that. They know that you can't just have a SQL person, you need to have a system around it. And the same thing's true with AI. So having a language model expert, brilliant, that's absolutely fantastic. And you're going to need those people, and they're going to there's not many around right now, are really people going to grow their skills as they do with Python and SQL, etc. But you're going to need people who can support that. So you need people who can manage databases, who can manage security, the risks, the compliance. And the big part of this, and we'll come back to this time and time again, is data. You don't have anything without the data. You've got to have data, and therefore you're going to need data engineers, you need data storage experts. That's going to be absolutely key, because everyone's got ChatGPT. So the value is going to be in the domain, and the value is going to be in the data.
Yeah. Do you think people would start? Where would you suggest they would start, I guess, if they wanted to get into this?
What's a company or
maybe what they should hire, essentially?
So first of all, what's the problem you're going to solve? So don't go and you don't say I need a spanner. You might say I need to tighten something. A screw. So what's a problem you're going to solve, and then think about where your data is, and then is it all my data sorted? I just need to put a language model on it. Probably unlikely, but let's suppose that. Then you want to have people who've got that sort of bent, good Python skills, good at natural language, those kind of people. Whereas if you've got, oh my God, I've got a huge problem, a massive enterprise, my data is everywhere, you're then going to need to have your data engineers, your security, your compliance. You've got to think who you are, how big you are, and what problem you're trying to solve before just going and saying, I'm going to do AI.
Yeah, of course. Any questions from the audience? No. Obviously, from my side, I'm keen to hear a little bit more about as well. Or we're going to go into this next topic on resolving this, and you touched upon a few of the points there of how you'd resolve this with the security regulation side of things. What do you think businesses should do at first port of call to solve these issues? If you have a certain kind of method to that.
So it really breaks down to two areas of functional and non-functional. So the non-functional is really going to be regs, permissions, and security. So first of all, are you allowed to do what you want to do? And I use HR as a great example. So let's suppose you want to mine your HR data to improve performance for good reasons. Does the country you're operating allow you to do that? Is that even allowed? Because you're suddenly taking all this HR data, making comparisons. You've got also issues of age discrimination, sexism, etc. Are you allowed to do that thing? So that's the first thing is, before you do anything, are you allowed to do it? If you're a massive company, a massive enterprise, that's a really big important step to do. Second thing is permissions. So if you throw in the HR data into it, what happens to that? If you throw in financial data, which is really for the board, and suddenly you're allowing everyone else to access that data. And then the third part of that is you're going to knock holes into it. So you've got these massive security systems around companies, but over decades of cybersecurity, and somebody puts a chatbot on it, and it just goes straight through it. And who's controlling that chatbot? So you've got to think about those three big non-functional things of, if this is going to be deployed, if anybody can type something in, what happens then? So that's the non-functional stuff. And the functional stuff then becomes data. You've got to get your data in. So if you want to mine your own data, if you're a small startup, all your data is probably sitting somewhere easy to get hold of. If you're a big enterprise, you're going to have financial databases, HR databases, procurement databases, email databases, file servers. How do you get together? How do you become useful in that? And then you got to think about scale. So the bigger you are, the more challenge you have with the AI models. So AI, as we know, is non-deterministic, and you get hallucinations, and you type the same thing each time and you get different results. You can see that. So if you're saying summarize a PDF, that's no problem at all, because you can see and understand the errors. You can calculate your risk. If you're saying, tell me what's going on in my company right now, and you've got 200,000 documents in there of which you've never read, how would you know what's right? And so you need to think about how you're going to handle that scale. And so we spend a lot of time structuring the data and creating data frames, so we're only operating in the right part rather than operating everywhere. And then you have to accept that it is non-deterministic. So you ask the question on day one, and I ask the question on day two, and we get different answers. Might be similar, but it'd be different. And therefore, how do we test it? How do we validate it? And building a process around that is going to be quite a big activity.
Okay. And from I guess from you hiring these people, and obviously other people hiring these individuals that will be able to help you kind of scale this out, what do you think is the role that's really needed to kind of?
Yeah, there isn't a silver bullet in here. And if you go and look at all the giants of this, like OpenAI stuff, they have a really diverse set of teams. So you're going to need to have those people who are brilliant analysts, brilliant data scientists, they understand language. You're going to have those people who are absolute whizzes with Python and can get everything going. And the same thing, you need people who are a bit more senior, who are putting an overview and perhaps maybe pumping the brakes a little bit to control that. And if you have just like some old dude like me go in and say stop, then you're not going to get anywhere. If you have somebody who's doing absolutely brilliant work but no brakes, you could crash the car. And so you need a whole diverse range of team and seniority. No one's got this squared away. No one's I've got the answer, there's a book on this, I follow this. It's not where we are yet. But that's why you need to move carefully but quickly. And you have to. It's okay to build things and work in sandboxes and test things, but people need to understand that if you're playing with company data, you could be exposing quite a lot to risk.
Yeah. We're seeing a lot in our space as well that a role was coming out as AI engineer, and I guess it kind of misconstrued at times. And what are your thoughts on that type of position?
So, I mean, I'm pretty sure that'll become like a standard name in the future, but I don't think it's quite defined yet. So when we work with it, we've got Liv doing some brilliant work with language models, absolutely fantastic, but she's not getting the data in place. So one of my colleagues, Tom, is getting data in place, or Amit's getting data in place, or Sam is doing the data flows. So you have these people working together, and it only works as a team because no one person is able to do all of those things. You haven't got enough time in the day, let alone the knowledge to do that. So you need that, and then somebody else is doing the security around AWS, and somebody else is doing the pen testing, and somebody else is considering the risks and the ethics. So you have all those problems. So the AI engineer makes sense, but I think it's a bit loosely defined. So it's a bit like data scientists. It's like, are you using SQL? Are you building machine learning models? It became a bit of a generic term for a while, data scientists, and now you've kind of got analysts and scientists. It's a bit more understood. Yeah. And so the AI engineer is definitely something for the future, but I don't think we've kind of defined what it is yet as an industry.
Yeah, it's evolved for many years. It's hard to pinpoint it down. Just for everybody watching today, obviously, this is Rob, obviously the founder of HSAT, and myself, obviously I lead one of the machine learning and data science teams. We're talking about specifically deploying AI for large scale food supply forecasting. And obviously, Rob, you lead that HSAT, and you've got a lot of interesting topics kind of that you were deploying on 6 specific products there. Keen for you to, I guess, show us a little bit about what you've got.
I mean, so we produce predictions of food supply. So you want to know how much rice coming out of China? You pay me enough, I'll tell you. it's we deal with very, very large data sets. So we're dealing with billions of data points, petabytes of data. And so if you think about something like India, trying to map the crop production in India, which is a very important producer of food, there's about 10 trillion satellite data points which we have available to us. Then we have weather data, which is again in the hundreds of billions, and then we have around 2,000 people around the world who are sending us data, out in the fields collecting data. And then we have crop reports. So it's 10 trillion, give or take some numbers, and it's big data, and it's very, very different data. So we've got photographs, we've got satellite imagery, we've got this big range of data sets. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get answers to that quickly. And if you put that all into a language model and say what's going on, it's just absolute junk. It can't do it. It can't respond. And if it does respond, it's just total junk. We know because we tried quite a bit. And so what we've been doing is that we do a lot of the calculations up front. So let's just take India as an example because it's so big.
Yeah.
And we say, well, we want to know about India sugar.
Okay.
So we think about India sugar, and then we break down India sugar, and we go, okay, we've got India sugar here, and then let's break it down to the states in India, like Maharashtra and Gujarat, and then we do pre-calculation and say, well, what was it like there in January? What was it like there in February? And then we build a data table around that. So when we say, tell me about India crops for sugar, it knows, oh, I haven't got to go and do 10 trillion calculations. We've already done all the engineering work for it, and it can ask that question. They can compare it to something else because we've already done that. And this is where you go from the amazing power to get that question answered, which is phenomenal. But that is very different from giving it all the data and saying, asking the question. So there's a huge amount of engineering work goes even before you put it into the language models. And that's kind of like where we are. I mean, shall I show you some stuff now? Is that
absolutely? Absolutely. Tech team actually are saying, oh, sorry, you're going to lower your camera slightly. Not camera, your microphone.
Okay.
Apologies.
All right. So if I share my screen now, yeah, cool. Oh, sorry.
Just need to log on, I think, to the the stream. 2 seconds. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them. There. Also, I was going to ask you while you're logging on there, how long did it take you to get to a position where you have a language model kind of operating to a scale where you can maybe monitor it quite on a weekly basis, perhaps?
So, so this is the great thing and the terrible thing about language models. So you can get a language model running in hours, so literally hours. You can have it up and running, and we can demonstrate something for you in hours. Get it useful, that takes weeks.
Yeah.
And then you find your errors out. So we've always been building towards this. So we've spent probably about a year getting the data lined up, getting the pipelines in place. We've got about 500,000 lines of code just for data engineering to get data in place. So we have all that, which makes it very easy to then drop in a language model, and then within hours, the team will get the answers out. But then you go, that doesn't work. Let me try again. And you go, well, hang on, what's the flaw going on there? So we found, for example, if you put the weather data in, and weather's very similar each day,
Yeah.
And you have like 4 or 5 days of weather, then he gets confused as to what day of weather it is. It just goes like, I'm lost. I'm a bit confused. If you have the crops, so we originally put in cotton and sugar in the same model. To me, cotton is very different from sugar, looks different, spelt different, different location, but it was getting confused. So we just separate out cotton, because you'd say, how is the cotton performing? It would go, oh, cotton's performing really well, but it was talking about sugar, so it's getting confused. So we had to learn how to separate that data out. So this is the thing, there's a very low barrier of entry, up and running in hours. Anyone can be nowadays. But it's the barrier of entry was actually a disadvantage, because you may have to break and say, well, hang on here, what's going on? So,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. If you're able to log on to this,
is it?
to the
Can you see that?
don't believe so. Be 2 seconds now.
Oh no, it's kicked out again.
So it'll be interesting to see kind of what you're talking about there and visualize it. Definitely. From a crop perspective as well, because you get all these, all the data points that you're working with.
Yes.
Is it comes from perhaps reports, or is it kind of web data that you're scraping?
So we have multiple different sources of data. So satellite is what we're known for, hence HSAT. But then what we have people out on the ground. So we've got built this capability called Tessa, and we have 2,000 people around the world who are visiting fields. We visit about 100,000 fields a year, and that all comes in, and then we analyze those pictures. It gives information about diseases and crop conditions. We then have weather data. So we've got massive data which has mapped those fields, we understand what's going on there. And then there's a lot of reports and research documents published about crops. So it's about $1 trillion a day spent on crops.
Right, so you got enough.
So we have that data set, so yeah.
Fair enough. Okay.
Is it working now? Okay. That works.
Sorry, a little technical issue just getting the slides onto the stream.
An irony there of doing a talk about technology, not being able to get the screen passed over there. That's fine.
But at least it's on there, isn't it?
It's on there now. Yeah.
Amazing. So yeah, I guess everything you were talking about just before about HSAT and kind of what you're operating, I guess this grid kind of outlines that.
Yeah.
I'm keen for you to outline that a little bit more.
Yeah. So when most people use a language model, they're used to typing a prompt and saying, summarize this PDF, or tell me what's going on in this location, and they can get a very quick prompt. And so, but behind the scenes, this is more kind of what's going on. So what you do is you have these embeddings, and there's a model, like I think of like a 3-dimensional model with a map, and each one of these has coordinates. So you can see over here, because the internet, kitten. So you've got kitten over there, you've got cat, and you've got dog, and you've got wolf, and you'll have these things, and they'll have each one of these terms and embeddings will have an actual latitude and longitude, will have an actual location for that data set. And then you'll have other words like apple and banana, and these will be the fruit over there, and they will also be in it, but normally they would be quite far apart. So if you did a query about a cat, it would find things about dogs, because people talk about dogs and cat flaps, etc. But if you did a query about apple, it'd be pulling things like banana and pear, etc. So if you said, tell me about when a cat stole a banana, it's probably not going to find anything unless somebody's got that documentation. So this is how the data is stored within the systems, and you literally have a coordinate system to explain how things are. And so it's possible to reveal this data within language models. And then because you can reveal this data, you can then start visualizing it. And so I'm just going to flick screens now to this. Oops. Can you just put and pause on for a moment? So otherwise you get some infinity screen. All right, thanks so much. So if we this here is all the data we have for the world sugar market right now.
Yeah.
So this is satellite data, this is tax reports, this is policy documents, this is crop reports, this is field visits. And every week we collect all these billions of data points. And then what we do is we say what's going on in the market right now, so we understand that. And then what we do is we take those embeddings, which we have in that database, which we visualized earlier, and then we say, show me how these things are connected. So show me how kitten is connected to banana, which is not, or show me how cat is connected to dog. Then show me that sentiment. So there'll be a negative sentiment between cats and dogs, so that'd be red, and say the relationship between cat and biscuits would be green. And so this allows ourselves and traders to look at this instantly and then see what's going on in the market. This is a few weeks old, this is.
Okay.
But I can go over here now, and you can see here, see sugar exports. This is around the EU. And you can see the sugar exports. There's some green lines coming from there. And I can see here, going down here, into European exports. And what's happening is it's positive for the market, because the EU has been struggling with the amount of sugar it can produce. Terrible rain, bad harvest, etc. Yeah. And so we can hover over here, we can see what's going on. And it's about that the sugar coming in from Ukraine is good for the markets. That's positive. However, farmers, particularly the French, don't like it. And they're caused on to protest. So we see negatives. And so this model here, which is built instantly, takes about 2 minutes to run in the background, happens all every week. It's pulling from all that data, and we can immediately understand that while Ukraine is positive for the food market, it's positive for the sugar industry, it is not positive for members of the European Union, and farmers are beginning to complain about that. So we can understand that, and we can see that in context. So we can say, what else is going on about Ukraine, and we can see if there's anything else about Ukraine, and they'll start finding out all the issues relating to Ukraine about sugar consumption. So perhaps you'll see countries reduce their own sugar consumption, and therefore that drives there to have more exports. And other countries then complain because they're exporting more. So you begin to see these sort of patches. You can start to see how this relates to India. So India, for instance, is stopping exporting sugar. That's a big problem for the world's supply of food because they're a massive producer. And you can see all this instantly. And all this is done with basically the tools like ChatGPT. It's not ChatGPT, but it's the same technology. And this is something which most people can't normally see or access, although it's the same data set. Yeah. It's about structuring your data properly. It's about using those tools in perhaps a slightly more innovative way than just asking it to write you a poem, and then being able to deploy data like this. We could also just go out into a more kind of traditional way. We've got our own language models built here. We could just say things like, so we did now say, oh my God, this is a live demo. This is going to be awful. What is the, given that we couldn't get the screen share working, I'm a bit concerned about doing a live demo. What's the level of sugar in India? So we know that data's in there.
So it's using the graph you just showed.
So, well, it's using the data set the graph's built from. Oh, God, that's typical. That is absolutely typical. There we go. Sorry, that's the connection. We keep losing the connection because the Wi-Fi keeps going out.
No, it's fascinating that the speed that you're able to do this.
So we're very, very dependent on having, obviously, because I'm not in the office, so you get the Wi-Fi there. So back on the connection now. So now what it's doing is going out to what data sets, and it's beginning to break down what is actually happening across India.
Yeah.
So satellites go over every 90 minutes. We pull that data down, we analyze it, we then map it to the sugar fields, we then assign the sugar fields to a particular state. We then go down and break it down, and then we compare to the past 5 years of data and say, well, it's currently going up compared to the last 5 years, going up compared to last month. And it gives you, and then it gives you a summary of what's going on. And that's real time. You know, it's real time because it dropped out. And that calculation is obviously incredibly quick. And normally you'd ask somebody to go and do that. I mean, 18 months ago, this internally, it'll take us like, a week of analysis. But that's now done on the fly, live, which is pretty impressive. But that's the power of language models. But it's only possible because language model and the engineering behind that.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it by yourself.
Absolutely. We actually got a few questions, Rob, from the audience. One from Matt specifically. For you, Rob, is there anything that AA can't do in the space at the moment that you'd love to see made possible in the next few years?
So I think the first thing is the context window. So when you ask it a question, there is an area that it can understand. You can't just give it unlimited text. It's getting bigger and bigger. Gemini's now, which the Google ones, come to about 1 million. So getting that much bigger is really important. And I think the ability to better understand pictures and then work with that. So it does. So ChatGPT will understand pictures, but it's not so good on the automation process. So you want to be able to put in imagery and ask it a question, and to better understand that question and have a larger context window. So there's limitations. I think the imagery in the larger context is limitations to me. So.
No, definitely, that makes sense. Obviously, we've got another question from Zahir. Keep them coming, by the way. What challenges do you face with large language models, and how do you address them?
So I think the big challenges that we face is, firstly, it's non-deterministic, so we don't always get the same answer. And so if you're going to deploy something to clients, so within 8 weeks of ChatGPT coming out, we had a version running off OpenAI's API within 8 weeks to a FTSE 100. So it's quite high risk, because are you getting the same answer out every day? And you've got to be concerned about that. So that lack of, it's not like a SQL query where you say, 2 + 2 is 4 every time. That's not what's going to happen. And so you've got to have real controls and to know that it's operating in the right way. And so that non-determinism is quite scary if you're delivering to, FTSE 100 firms. But the way we deal with that is we chop down the scale, and we do a lot of pre-processing. Okay. So rather than putting in 10 trillion points, we take 10 trillion points and we do the analysis up front, and then it reduces the error chances. So it's much more concrete answers. So the non-determinism, which is an issue from scale, those are the problems that we face. So.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Obviously, it goes back to your point, I guess, that you mentioned earlier about the security aspect of it as well. Another question from Daoud, actually: would you model work for a country that gives you little data? For example, how much cotton, I guess, leaves Sudan or Africa?
So we do actually model that. I won't bore you or share my screen again, but yeah, we actually do model that. So we collect tax data and customs data from all around the world, which shows data flowing, and we can see it going from countries. And then we build deltas, so we can say year on year there's decrease. So I happen to know that Belgium is decreasing the supply of sugar to Israel, and then Poland's increasing it, and we've got visuals, and you can see that flow. So it allows people to understand straight away. It's like, oh, okay, there's a change in flow of data. There's a change, and people can start making decisions about that. So, I mean, the giant firms out there, the ADMs, the Bungers, the Cargills, they have a lot of data, like over years and years, but they've built big systems for that. We're now able to get to clients who never had access to that within minutes. Yeah. So yeah, that's something we should do, actually monitor.
No, that's
trade
great.
flows.
Because obviously you get to do it at an international scale.
Yes,
really.
yeah.
No, that's great. Another question actually from Tripty: how do you deal with the skill gap that we face in AI?
So carefully, it's like my code word for most of my answers here. So you have to learn, and you have to accept that you don't know. So a bit of modesty and humility to recognize you don't know. And if somebody says to you, I can do this, and they've done it before, just run away from them. Just run away. Somebody says to you, give me a day and I'll see how long it's going to take me. That's much more reassuring. So you have to move carefully. There's massive knowledge out there, but a lot of the people who are talking about this are talking about using ChatGPT on a PDF. They're not talking about doing it across a billion rows of data. So find people talking about what you're talking about, or start testing what you've been given. Just sense check it. Does that make sense? And don't do it alone. No one does this stuff alone. You can't do this by yourself. It's like no one builds a plane by themselves. It takes a company and a team of people to build a plane. And so working with your colleagues, sense checking things, seeking advice, it's all the common sense stuff, but move slowly and test it on data. And ideally, when you scale the data, when you add a whole load of new data, you'll kind of know roughly what's in there. And then that allows you kind of like sense check the numbers. You should know roughly what the answer is before you sort of go out. Otherwise, you could get it quite wrong.
Yeah. Question for myself, actually, from the audience. What skills are the hottest in the space right now? And what should I be upskilling myself in? What employers looking for? Now, from a recruitment perspective, obviously, you've got to stand out. And obviously, technical skills and I guess applications are being increased every single day, so there's always something new on the market. So you should always be looking on what's hottest on the market at the moment and what skills at the moment. Well, the LLM application and being involved in large language models is definitely something that's really hot right now. So upskilling yourself with being in an environment where you're able to develop yourself in that space would be, or expose yourself in that space would be most important. That's what I would say. Obviously, being strong on the programming side in Python, SQL is very important as the fundamentals for that as well. And what are employers looking for? Well, I guess we answered a little bit of this, but I'll probably bounce it back to you, Rob, because I guess what are your thoughts on that and kind of what you see on what's upskilling, or really what people, the hottest skill sets in the market?
I think, to me, I mean, personally, if somebody says I do all this, I'm just like, no, you don't. be a bit of honesty. So people who have been got some project experience behind them, and that could be their own project. That you couldn't say OpenAI are practically free. You can build your own projects. You can learn from things. There's loads of stuff on there, like Hugging Face. People can go and get these things out, and they can build projects. Yeah. There's no reason. It's like Python. If somebody says to you, "I want to be a Python developer," and they've never written anything in Python, then they don't want to be a Python developer. They just want to say they are. And so with the AI world now, there's so much you can build. If somebody comes to you and says, I'm good at this, or I want to do this, they should be able to evidence they've either tried to learn and they're showing enthusiasm, or they've actually delivered it either way.
Yeah, actually, I would second that as well. And what you're saying, that makes me think of something that I see a lot of my clients kind of mentioning when I speak to them, when I present them, obviously, everyone's CVs. Impact is really important. So making sure that you have delivered on your CV a proven examples of where you successfully achieved a challenge, your accomplishments, measuring that in kind of maybe percentages, pound signs, making sure that I've increased certain profits or so on. Some employers do like that, some necessarily don't mind that, but I think that that's something that I see is really kind of, when you read the CV, makes sense ultimately, because you understand what you've done and what you've achieved. That's something that I would mention as well. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I think we're all done. I mean, it depends kind of if you had any last points.
No, I mean, I think I'm maybe overly cautious. I keep talking to people, we have to be careful about using this technology, but like, we're running as fast as we can do, but safely. So we've been using it within weeks of it coming out. We had it deployed with clients, and we think everyone should be trying it, but just make sure you're putting the appropriate safety in place.
Actually, before we go, obviously with HSAT, kind of the vision for the future, I don't know, because obviously you're a small organization, but you're doing really well, and the models you've created are quite astonishing. What's your growth?
Well, the next thing is that we're going to be deploying pricing models, and we predict pricing, and so we've actually done that already, and it works for us. So we're trading on our own money right now, and we're predicting pricing and we're trading. So we're making a profit, a significant, over 100%. markup on our own trades, because that data is so much and it's so accurate. It gives us insights to what's going on, so we can actually make trade decisions. So eventually, we want to be selling that out to the market and saying, this is what we recommend for a buy-sell signal. So that's kind of where we think from technology. And then we also want to get into much more logistics, because as the world, so we're predicting yields, what's going on in crops, obviously climate change, massive driver of that. As the world becomes less stable, we've got more and more logistics problems. So we're working on those models. That's a bit of a long-term thing, but we certainly hope that this year we'll be out there deploying. We hope to be deploying the pricing prediction, and that I think will be
a whole new product next to the crop GPT.
And we'll say, this is what you should buy, and when, and what price, and when to sell it. Okay. And we have our own trading bot now, and it will tell us when to buy and sell. Okay. Kind of works for us, but we're not quite ready to go out with that. But that's the kind of the next big thing for us to release. So.
Okay. We've got another question actually before we go. A question from Starsky. He's curious that since generative AI can now code in Python and SQL, is having these skill sets necessity?
So I'm not a Python developer, but I think it's going to decrease in the way that it was. Some of the programs and applications we built, we've used generative AI for that. So we use generative AI to create Terraform, which is a form of code to create the infrastructure. And then we built the infrastructure with generative AI, which is pretty impressive if you think about that. And then we used some of the code was quite literally written by like ChatGPT to support us. And so that really allows us to move really quickly. So one of the reasons that we manage to keep our team small is that we are using every possible option we can do to accelerate it. So, but the problem is that when it gives you a bit of code, it just gives you a bit of code, and that's great. I'll look at that and go, I'm not going to do that. Whereas my colleagues, who are much better than me, much smarter than me, go, okay, I know exactly how to plug it all in together. And so they have a much better understanding. I think that there will become a time when Python and SQL become less important, in the same way as you think what Excel can do right now compared to what they used to have to do with the calculators and the slide rulers and the abacuses. Look at what Excel does now. You just press a button, it does it all for you. It does the averages and the calculations instantly. And that's kind of where we'll be with code writing in the future. The question is not if that's going to happen. The question is how fast that's going to happen. And people will say that won't happen. It's like, well, you've got literally the code on the computer, but then you have a compiler, then you have Python, and it's just a level of abstraction. And what language models are doing is they're offering you the next level of abstraction away from it. The critical thinking skills, which coders have, the logic making skills, that's not going to go away. But you might be using different syntax. So the syntax might be a prompt rather than a Python script. It might be a different way of working with it. I think it was NVIDIA or somebody else came out and said something like that. And like they know more than me. So I'd go with whatever he says.
Yeah. I was going to say on the first point you mentioned there in terms of having the code ready to go, and going back to your point about security, how do you approach kind of making sure that code that the generative AI has developed, is secure and ready to, I guess, going to be functional?
Yeah. So the example was we literally asked it to create us some code, and then that goes onto a box, and that box is then in a secure location. But that code is just a module, and that fits into a wider piece. And this is why you can't just throw it all away tomorrow. So you've got the person to run security. Is that box secure, the firewall secure, or the pen testing secure? And then you've got the actual code, and that will just fit into a much wider piece.
Fair enough.
And so you're working with generative AI, and a good way to think of it is like if you had a colleague who's writing some code for you, perhaps a junior member of staff who's writing some code for you, quite fast, but they're quite junior. Would you work with them? Yeah, of course you would. Do you use graduates? Yes, of course you would. But would you check their code before they gave it to you and deploy it? Yes, you would. And the thing I would fear is not that is this going to happen. It's the people it affects the most is going to be the graduates and the entrants, because what this means is that graduates can be replaced much quicker than you can replace a senior person. So we still use very, very senior, very, very expensive Python devs. Provided, by the way, and they're great and they're very expensive. But can I replace a graduate with like me, I'm a bit of a senior guy, and those are the people stuff. And then where's your pipeline come for future developers? Where are you getting that people? If you start cutting those people off and they stop getting the work, how are you going to grow the technology in the industry? And I think the more frightening thing is who it impacts, and then the long-term industry for that individual as well as industry as well. I think that's a wider concern.
Yeah, well, that is obviously a worry on the market today. I mean, I don't know if you have an answer to that, maybe a solution to that.
No, I mean, because you can, everyone will say they want to be ethical and they want to use people and they want to do the right thing. But every company, every director has an obligation to make the most profits possible. And they are going to, I don't think they'll be cutting staff, they just won't be hiring staff. So I can point to scenarios where we've specifically not hired people because we can get it done with generative AI. We've not lost anybody and we're growing, but we would not hire somebody because we can work at a greater rate of pace by leveraging the technology. That's always happened. You know, I have less horses now, I've got a car. You know, it's just, that's the rate of technology. But the issue now is that this is on such a scale and such a speed that it's not just like replacing your horse with a car. It's quite more, it's more fundamental.
Yeah. It dives into the next question. We got another one from Ashish, actually. Any views on futuristic use cases for, I guess, LLMs in general?
I mean, I think the most obvious thing really is you've got the US presidential election coming up. And the most obvious thing there is less futuristic, but what is going to happen is there's going to be huge amounts of fake video, huge amounts of fake imagery. There's going to be tens or hundreds of thousands of posts which are going to be saying something, and they're going to have people replying to it and supporting it and liking it, and that is all going to be done by AI. Now, the Russians, you had the St. Petersburg's trolls doing it manually in previous elections. They're going to be doing this now automatically on a massive scale, and people aren't ready for that. And I think that is a thing of concern. And then a more positive note is medical stuff. I mean, people are going to get diagnosed much more quicker by AI. If you think about technology like Y-Things, I love all this kind of like, measuring your health, but Y-Things is a massive brand. They've got, blood rate monitors, you've got the smart wings coming out, you've got temperatures, weight scales, all those sort of things. And you'll be able to, they already collect all your data for you, and they have an output button for your doctor. But in the future, that's going to be the output button to an AI. And you could drop off your ECG rates, your blood pressure monitors, drop it into a chat GPT site and say, here are my symptoms, here's all my medical background, what do you think? And that's going to be happening, and that's going to be happening, I imagine, quite quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the contrast of the positive and I guess negative aspects that AI will have on us and I guess industries at the moment. Well, look, that's a great point to finish this conversation on. Look, thank you so much for all the questions. We've got a lot more, so it's great. And yeah, thank you very much.